they start dropping 4-letter words and F-bombs, and they start tearing each other's limbs off, and there's blood everywhere. You're like, what? It doesn't work. It takes you right out of it. There's a consistency that's important. And this is, again, it's a universe. You know, these Thundercats characters, these He-Man characters, they're coexisting now in a crossover universe, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel authentic, even though these characters have existed for decades, because the writer wasn't writing them consistently or authentically. And it just takes you right out of that book. Skeletor shouldn't be saying that. He-Man really shouldn't be saying that. You know, it doesn't work. So when you're writing your characters in your universe, or especially if you're writing somebody else's characters, those are their kids, that's their baby, and you need to respect that and write it authentically. And if you're not writing somebody else's character authentically, then you're disrespecting that character, and you're dishonoring them, and you're getting their voice wrong, and the whole crossover, the whole cinematic universe is falling apart because you're not putting effort into the foundation of it.
There's a big celebrity. He again is one of these really humble artists who's probably not going to say anything. If you've ever seen Warrior Nun on Netflix, so the creator of Warrior Nun is here. He's Ben Dunn. He's in Hall. He used to have a map back here. He's in the main atrium, like I think when you walk in afterwards, it's where all the artists are. Not the rotunda where we are, but it's the other hall where there's just rows of artists. But Mr. Ben Dunn is over there. He's a legend. In Japan, they call him the father of American manga, because he and his brother, when they started Antarctic Press, they were some of the first people to not only import manga from Japan and translate it, but also make their own stylized manga here. I think the most famous one's probably Gold Digger. Gold Digger is actually going to hit its 300th issue, I think, either later this year.
That was Fred Perry.
That's Fred Perry.
Press. Yeah. But Ben Dunn did Ninja High School.
Yeah.
They did licensed books from anime, like Project Eiko and Gigantor and Speed Racer, like at a time when people just weren't thinking about licensing Japanese properties that had a niche. Like I think they did RoboCop comics, Robotech comics in America in the 80s. Stuff like no one would think about.
But
yeah,
make sure to visit him because he's a really nice guy. He has a lot of insights among all of us here. Actually, I know more than one, but he's the one who definitely not only signed the Netflix deal, but got the Netflix deal and had Warrior Nun like on Netflix. I think they're going into season 2 now. But we were talking at breakfast this morning because we teamed up with him recently. One of his characters, Tomorrow Girl, teamed up with Kamen America, and we were very happy to do it because we have a very good working relationship with Antarctic Press. And so we had the Tomorrow Girl Kamen America team up. We were having breakfast this morning, and he was like, "It was great. Like that's the best crowdfunder we've ever had. Thank you so much for letting us borrow the character." And he said, "You should do more crossovers because I think the opportunity is there." And I told him, I said, "Well, it's no offense because we like working with you, but it's special. Tomorrow Girl and Ninja High School has had years of backstory. Like people love these characters. You're a known quantity. People who have followed Ninja High School and the Adventures of Tomorrow Girl for a number of years, they know already what to expect. And now this is just a continuation of that. Kamen America, we're babies by comparison. In 2 years, we've already put out 6 volumes, more than, I don't know, that's 200 pages a year. 200 times 6 is a lot of pages. So I said, it's not just a team up that you can do with anyone. So just an independent creator who comes to us and says, hey, I have a 32-page book, let's do a crossover. I'm like, it might be good, but it's just not going to happen because you have to take the time to build it up where it seems like the two can take place together. Now, the funny story is this. So crossovers can be kind of tricky because if there's 2 creative teams or 2 creators, you have to find a way for them to gel together. Luckily, Kamen America is a superhero Sentai book, and Ninja High School is in the same vein. So you would think that would be easy, and for the most part it was. 90% of it was. But what we said contractually is, you can write the story as you want, but when you send the script to us, we have full editorial over our character. It has to sound like her. And so one of the things that happened was, as Mark was saying, there were a couple times where she would curse, even though it would be like wingding, so you didn't know what the cuss word was. But in our world, it's like she doesn't curse at all. Like our book is completely friendly for ages 12 and above. Anyone can read it. There's no nudity, there's no foul language, no smoking, nothing like that. So she's so wholesome as a character, she would never do that. The other thing too, and this is kind of spoiler, in his book, there's aliens. Now that's a big plot in his book. In our world, aliens don't exist. So how do we square that circle? So we actually had to write around the script where she believes that it's her agent who's basically like having people in bodysuits like fighting them. So they even go to space in the book, but at the end, one of the aliens, like the good aliens, is like, thank you for saving our world. Like, you're invited to live on our planet anytime. And, you know, his character says, oh yeah, I'd love to. Even though Earth is my home, I really do appreciate it. And then our character says in reply, like, yeah, and everyone knows there's no such thing as aliens. And so his character's like, really? Like, after like all that stuff that we just went through? And so at the end of it, we're back to square one, where our readers who might see that, they'll know that there's no inconsistency, because we wrote around it to be consistent with our world.
So one of our philosophies when it comes to, so like Kamen America and Black Ops are the two books that we both jointly created. There are, so they consist very consistently in their shared universe. But Soul Finder was created by Doug Ernst, and obviously Tomorrow Girl was created by Ben Dunn. And when we have characters from other people's books crossing over with ours, or we're crossing over with theirs, what we have to think about is we want our character obviously to be written, you know, organically and intuitively and correctly, but we don't want to inhibit their storytelling. If they want to use aliens in their book, that's their universe and that's their choice, and we can't tell them, no, you can't put aliens in your book because we don't have aliens in our book. So it's the burden is on us to try and write around it, make it consistent. But the example we think back to is that
G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe, I always tell people this. So Marvel Comics had a G.I. Joe comic and a Transformers comic back in the 80s. And they ran, in terms of continuity, they ran in parallel continuity. Where G.I. Joe, Transformers had an issue where they blew up San Francisco.
Nuked it off the face of the planet.
Gone. Just absolutely vaporized it. G.I. Joe, San Francisco's still there. Never disappeared, never blew up. But that's because their continuity is they only shared a continuity of universe when they intersected. So when they did Transformers versus G.I. Joe, and Bumblebee got blown up by G.I. Joe and rebuilt as Goldbug, when they stopped their crossover and went back to running parallel continuities, that narrative had impact on the Transformers book. Bumblebee was still Goldbug. But when the Transformers blew up San Francisco, that happened in the Transformers book, not during a crossover. So San Francisco can still exist in the G.I. Joe book. And that's the attitude we have, is that they can do whatever they want in their books. When we're not crossing over, we'll do whatever we want in our books when we're not crossing over. The continuities only intersect when we do our crossovers. And then we can all go back to having our independent freedom to tell exactly the kind of stories we want to tell and how we want to tell them. That way we're never stepping on each other's toes, and that way we can also all get along and be friends and play nice without interfering with each other's narratives.
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun whenever we've been playing with it, we've been dabbling in it. One of the things that, again, going back to the Marvel movies, I think the danger you run into is eventually you grow too big that once you have the Avengers crossover in the Avengers movie and something happens like New York that gets destroyed, then the idea is, okay, well, how do you actually go back to having like Iron Man movies and not addressing what happened? And I think the way they said it is they said, imagine that you have like Captain America 2, Iron Man 2. The idea was that the Avengers was like the shared sequel between all of them. And so in a way you're obligated to watch it and then go back. Where I think the difficulty is happening is when you're having something happen not in a crossover movie. For example, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It's not an Avengers movie, yet it kind of feels like it because you actually have characters from this other movie going into there, and it's like, man, like, you're gonna wonder where this character goes after that, because if you haven't seen the movie and play catch up, you're gonna be kind of lost. That's a problem that we hopefully will not have to address. We've done a very good job in maintaining the status quo as we move forward. Going to his example, there's another one. So this is for the guys in here. Our friend Brian Ball, it's his first time here in Bell County Comic Con. It's a rare appearance, doesn't do a lot of conventions, but he has a comic and it's called Rags, and it's very, very popular amongst the military because he's a combat vet, and I think he's still active duty, but it's about a Marine who has to fight during a zombie apocalypse. And he wanted to cross over with us, and I thought, your book is like a hard R. Like, your book has a lot of the things that we don't have in our books, swearing, profanity, you name it. And so, but we trust him because he has an established brand and people like the book. He has a military book, we have a military book. Ours is like G.I. Joe, his is more like the Nam, I guess, or the Punisher. So we made the agreement with him. We said, you can have your character acting the way that they do. You can have all the swearing and stuff that you want. But our character cannot do that. So that if someone picks it up, they'll say, oh, well, they're morally and principally consistent because their characters don't swear, they don't drink, they don't do any of this stuff, they don't smoke. And it was a good compromise, and I think everyone who's read it, they thought it was pretty funny because they said, wow, how do you square that circle? Like, it's Brian writing it, he tends to kind of go overboard with this kind of stuff. And we just said, no, he was very amicable to it. We just said, I know both of our characters are military, but we just happen to have one that's, I guess, more clean cut, more of kind of a good soldier boy, good Boy Scout type character. So there are times, I think, where you can actually have those types of crossovers and have it work. You just have to make sure that they're consistent throughout, no matter what you do.
In the 90s, I recall, so Batman, right? In the 90s, Danny O'Neill was the Batman general editor for just the Batman books, but not for any of the other books that Batman might appear in, like Justice League of America. I can't recall who the editor on that one was, but the writer was Grant Morrison. Danny O'Neill, for all of his Batman books as the editor, his mandate was that Batman was an urban legend who nobody believed existed. He was the Dark Knight, you know, like criminals feared him because they didn't know if he was a monster or man, that kind of thing. But then he would go and he would appear in Justice League of America by Grant Morrison, where he's running around in broad daylight through the city streets, and cameras are watching him, and everyone knows Batman's there, and he would show up for photo ops of the Justice League. Like, but they shared a universe. They're all part of the same DC Comics shared universe. Like, how did you rectify that? Well, it's the same parallel continuity attitude. Is that when Batman is in the Batman books, he is an urban legend that no one believes exists. When Batman is in somebody else's book, like Superman or Justice League, then he is a public figure and he can be in the spotlight and people can see him and get photos with him. But that doesn't mean that they don't take, those Batman books and those Justice League books don't take place in the same universe. It just means that when they're within their individual books, they operate under slightly different rules so they can still tell the kinds of stories they want to tell with the character. And so when, you know, our USAGI character from Black Ops appears in Rags, Rags is still a mature reader's book, but when our characters are in the pages of Rags, they're still their characters, they still behave the way they would and have the kinds of things happen to them that would only happen in our books, so that it's still consistent.
So I know that there's a lot of people here who maybe have questions, or maybe you're working on your own titles, or hopefully aspiring to do so. We're here for any questions that you might have regarding how you create comics, or just any general questions you might have in terms of the process of doing it. Like I said, Mark is the writer and I'm the artist. If you're, pretty much you can't go through the doors without owning something by us. If you have the VIP bags, that's Kamen Academy over there. It's a whole bag of worms in terms of how that works and how that fits into our storyline. I think all of you have lanyards that say Iconic Comics on them. All of the badge art has all of our characters on them as well. So I guess we'll just open the floor real quick for any questions that people might have. Yes?
What would it take to work for you guys?
So the way it works is that Iconic Comic, do you mean for us or for Iconic Comics?
Either one. I mean, I'm just trying to, like, hey, just push the boxes or something.
Sure. So what we do is, as far as writing is concerned, the writing's already taken care of because he writes the book. Art is a little bit different. We do have a kind of an open submissions policy. Every single one of our volumes has like a fan art gallery in the back. And so sometimes we find, like, right now our Japanese audience on Twitter is like really, really strong. And so a lot of Japanese artists will just say, oh, here's some Common America art. And then I'll contact them and say, hey, this is like really good. I'll pay you. And if you want, we're going to have it in our art gallery. And most of the time they're very receptive to that. So art is a little bit easier simply because there's some opportunities for publication. If it's like a comic book, like if you have something, we have no control over that. Iconic Comics is run by a very gracious and successful entrepreneur here in Temple. He has final say over anything that's under their banner. So typically they want books that are completely finished. Now there's some exceptions to that. Long Harbor, for example, that was a book that was not finished, but the quality of it and the art of it was so good that they said, when you're done, we'll do it. Like, we'll put it under the Iconic imprint, and we'll help you with the printing and the fulfillment and everything like that. So as far as like working for them, I mean, they do have the contact email. It's info@iconiccomics.com, and you can just kind of pitch them and say, hey, I would like to do something to help you. And like I said, they're always kind of looking for work, whether it be fulfillment or packing boxes or helping at conventions and everything like that. I would say that that's the place to go.
I actually emailed them, and I got
Part of it might be that they're just busy because they do a lot of things besides running the Iconic Comics thing. One of them told me that they get about 15 submissions a week. Yeah, and that's across the world, essentially, not just in the United States. Part of it, for example, we have some friends who live in the Czech Republic, and the Czech Republic, I mean, it's like, I don't know, maybe the size of Arkansas, 3 hours north, south, east, and west by car. And so a lot of times, because in Europe, they're all kind of divided by country in the same way we're divided by state, but we still consider ourselves Americans. So I never say like the Arkansan audience or the Texan audience, we just say the American audience. Over there, it's a little bit more difficult, because let's say you speak Czech and you have a Czech comic. That's going to be really hard if you're going to try and sell it to Italy and they don't speak Czech. So a lot of them want to try and break into the American market. And so those submissions come in because they're like, how do we get published in America? And so I think having to deal with all of those can be kind of difficult. But I mean, I would just keep on trying and just say, you know, this is just a follow-up email. I would just love to be involved in any way, shape, or form and see what they have to say. But if you don't get a reply, that's nothing against you. It's just literally, I mean, I've talked to them on the phone sometimes and I've seen some of their screenshots of how many messages they have coming in. So a lot of it is just kind of playing the waiting game and seeing what they have to say. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting guy too, Alejandro Mirabal. It's his second time here at Bill County Comic Con. Again, another guy you should say hi to. His book is Long Harbor, but interesting guy. He came from Cuba during the communist regime over there. His father worked in, I think, archaeology and salvaging. And so he basically said, hey, I need to go over to this other country on business. And basically it was a way to sneak his family out. So they ended up going to like all over Asia. He ended up in Myanmar. Alejandro, probably in our circle of artists, he's one of the most talented. He had the most fascinating job. He was a deep salvage artist. So he would put on scuba gear, go into wreck sites, and he would have a waterproof sketch pad, and he would have a waterproof like pencil. And his job was to draw like the wreckage of these ships. And so he got really good at drawing water and drawing like, whatchamacallit, like just, I don't know, like sunken ships and stuff like that. But he published Long Harbor, which is through Iconic Comics, but right now he works for id. So he's their character designer. So it's kind of a big deal, because if you ever played Doom growing up, for example, I mean, like, he works for them now as a character designer. His friend Will is actually with him at the booth. So make sure you stop by and say hi, tell them to show them your portfolio, ask their questions about what's it like working for a video game company, because him, Will, and Eric Canetti, they're all down there right now, and all three of them work in video games. Eric Canetti works for Riot, so I know a lot of young people who play video games, you know Riot Games, like he works for them, but again, he's too humble to tell you, so make sure that you stop by and say hello to them. They'll appreciate it. Whereas we're a lot more outgoing, so we don't mind talking about stuff that we do.
We got like the 2-minute warning.
2-minute warning, okay. So yeah, any other questions that people have? Yeah.
I recently read some writing advice that Neil Gaiman gave. It was like, finish the story and then rewrite it, go back and put in all those Easter eggs, and then everyone thinks you're a genius.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, how many like rewrites do you do, and then when do you like get all those?
I'll address one part first, and then I'll give it to him. So the other advice you might hear that's similar to it is they always say to start at know your beginning and know your end, and then either work backwards or work forwards towards it. But he's the writer, so I'm like,
I mean, it's absolutely right. So the way we do comic script is, the nice thing about comic scripting is that there is no academic formatting. It's not like a manuscript for prose or a screenplay for movies. So everybody has their own different way of writing a comic script. What we do is that we workshop a summary first, and then I segment that summary sentence by sentence into page breakdowns. This is what happens to page 1, page 2, page 3, etc. And then once I have that done, that's where you can feed in all of your little details, things like that. You can put in your little nuggets of continuity. But then once you do the actual script, so I take like page 1, panel 1, 2, 3, 4, this is what happens in each one, this is the dialogue, sound effects, and everything. That's where I put in the details. And that's where you can further flesh things out. But the real trick of it is to make people think that you had it up here all along is 5 issues later, refer back to just something that genuinely was pointless or meaningless, but it's like, that character in the background from issue 1, that was the evil mastermind all along. Like, yeah, staring you in the face, you know, like the purloined note by Edgar Allan Poe, you know, something like that. And people are like, oh wow, you're a genius. You thought everything out, so far in advance, really like not really, but Jay, he's like, yeah, I am a genius, you do something like that. But that's what a lot of the continuity people do. It's like going back to Spider-Man. There was this one-off character who was an amazing Spider-Man, like number 5. He was Peter's chemistry teacher named Dr. Warren. Nobody character, just his chemistry teacher. Like 100 issues later, there's this villain named the Jackal, who's just the main villain for like an entire 2-year arc of Spider-Man in the 70s. Finally unmask him. Dr. Warren, my old chemistry teacher, is like, that's me. I was there all along, Peter, for all your the bad things that happened to you for the past 70 years. And it sounds like, oh, it was planned all along. No, it wasn't. He was just a throwaway character from issue 5 of Amazing Spider-Man. But they made it sound like, he was, oh, it all makes sense now. This bad guy who'd been there the whole time knew Peter since he was a kid. Stuff like that. So you can use hindsight to go in and feed those little continuity nuggets that tie everything together. And there's a lot of stuff, obviously, we plot out, the main big ones that we plot out in advance. But little stuff like that, a lot of it's just inspiration. You'll just go back, you'll reread Common America 3, hey, there's this little thing here, I could exploit that, and now I'm writing Common America 7, do something fun with that. And so you get opportunities to do things like that. And everyone thinks you're really smart when you aren't.
I always say, because we've been working together for over a decade, when we were working in merchandising, I was the muscle and he was the brain. So I remember I got the job because I could draw Transformers pretty well. And at the time, in fashion at least, it's easy. Most artists have a good grasp of human anatomy, but not a lot of people have a good grasp of mechs and robots. And so I was eager because it's like, hey, we're Real Fine, we hire a cadre of artists, about 20, and we pay you for creating t-shirt designs and stuff for other publications, whether it be tote bags, posters, things of that nature. If you like Spider-Gwen, it's probably the most famous thing I did besides working for Stan Lee, but probably my claim to fame was when Spider-Gwen first debuted into the Spider-Verse, or Edge of Spider-Verse, they needed a fashion line. And at the time, they're like, well, Tim draws girls really well. So I worked on the first official Spider-Gwen merchandise that debuted at New York Comic Con. But the one thing I always tell people is, a lot of times, especially when I got that first gig, I was so eager. And they're like, all right, you're the clever one, so come up with something. And I'm like, great. And I'd call Mark and be like, Mark, they want me to do a cereal t-shirt, I don't know anything. And so he would feed me the ideas and I would draw them. My advice would be, a lot of people in the room are either artists or writers, but you're not both. Have the humility to know what you are. Are you an artist or are you a writer? 1 out of every 100 people are going to be both, and it's rare. Maybe Doug TenNapel, creator of Earthworm Jim, he's both. He can write and he can draw. I'm a technical writer. My day job is I'm an audiologist by trade. I'm used to reading academic papers. I can edit and I can proofread like nobody's business, day in and day out. Everything about grammar and punctuation, nothing escapes my eye. You can read through all of our volumes and you're not going to really find any spelling or grammar mistakes because I watch that stuff. I am not creative at all. I have to be told what to draw. And that's where he comes in because he's the creative one. So if you're an artist and you're a really good artist, if you're like, I'm going to create the masterpiece, I'm going to create a manga or a graphic novel that's going to blow everyone's minds, it's like, you might artistically, but not your writing. And you have to be humble enough to know that. There are ways of finding out how to do it. There are tricks for writing. I'll give you one. I'll give everyone in the room, I'll give you a piece of advice that's going to save your book. We have encountered several artists from Marvel and DC who always have to rewrite and redo their stuff because they always make this error. There is a thing in writing comics. Comics is a medium in and of itself that has its own rules and tricks. One of them is called the page turn surprise. You'd be very surprised how many Marvel, DC, and Image artists do not know this. When you're writing a comic, especially if it's like a horror or if it's a surprise, you don't have your surprise on an odd-numbered page. Why? Because when you turn the page over, you've spoiled it right there. You keep it on the even page. And the reason that's helpful, and I would have never known that because I'm not a writer, we read comics intuitively. But if someone says like, hey Mark, if I'm like, hey Mark, I know that we've already gotten the script out and then writing this, wouldn't it be really great if we put like the boogeyman under the person's bed? He'd be like, yeah, idiot, you can't just do that. You can't insert 1 page, you have to insert 2, because that will completely mess up your page turn. So make sure, there's a lot of videos on YouTube, for example, where you can actually look at comic book writing scripts and tips. And that's going to save you and help you in the long run when you're trying to come up with this stuff.
We got to go.
We got it. All right, all right. Thank you guys so much. We're at the Iconic Comics booth. Come by and say hi. Autographs are free. We're in